This is entitled Incarcerated Fathers' Effect on Children by Ebony Myers for Sociology 354. Incarceration not only has a long-term effect on the children, but also of the caregivers of the children. There have been more studies being done on not just the children, but on caregivers, especially the mothers. More institutions are realizing how much of an effect incarceration has on inmates' children's lives, and now they are making more of an effort to help inmates be more involved. What causes difficulty for the inmates to be more involved is the lack of resources from prison systems. And not only the lack of support from families, but also the lack of support from the government. What the government is not realizing is that incarcerated fathers' long-term effect on children could cause children to end up in prison. So now there's a cycle of people going into prison because of what they see in their everyday lives. The government could save a lot more money if they created more reforms. Now, even though they are realizing it, the real question is, are they really acting on how to place incarcerated fathers more involved in their children's lives? Even for fathers who are incarcerated in mental health facilities, their effect on their children may be even worse. Just because some people that are incarcerated, but they also are in the mental health facility, are usually shut out from their families. I argue that incarcerated fathers have a harder time bonding with their children than non-incarcerated fathers in the following ways. Fathers cannot provide the proper resources to care for their children. Both the child and the father experience mental health issues. And when released from prison, fathers have a hard time adjusting to society, and society has a hard time adjusting to them. Throughout this presentation, we will take a look into each of my points in more detail. In this slide, I will address the lack of resources. Incarcerated fathers maintain at least monthly contact with their children. Economic hardship is created for single mothers and children, and incarcerated fathers contribute about $2,600 a year to their children and families. Fathers struggle to maintain contact because due to lack of resources, fathers have to get sent money for pen and paper, for envelopes, stamps, and the outside parent has to provide money for transportation to and from prison. With economic hardship, mothers have to work hard because they are alone financially. And with incarcerated fathers only being able to contribute about $2,600 a year, inmates have to work to get jobs in prisons, and they do not get paid much. $2,600 a year is not much of a contribution for single mothers to care for their children. Even when they get out of jail, it is hard for them to contribute much because they have backgrounds and it affects their job search. Having lack of resources affect the bonding of fathers and their children due to not being able to call the father anytime they would like, being able to see them anytime they would like, and even with something simple as getting to know them. So when fathers are out of prison, it makes it even more hard because this child hasn't seen them much, hasn't been able to interact with them much, especially for a young child. A young child can't read or write. It is easier when a parent is not incarcerated so that they can try to create a bond with their child. But that all goes into being able to take initiative and actually talk to the children about why the father went to prison and what are they going to do different now. Lack of resources will still be there because the father will most likely have trouble finding a job and being able to provide for that child. And with economic hardship, the child may become frustrated by seeing their mother struggle and knowing that things could be different if their father wasn't in jail. Viewing lack of resources in this way and bonding in this way, it just makes it harder on a child to be able to bond with their incarcerated father once they're released from prison, because all of these things that went wrong as a child could have been prevented if their father didn't make one mistake. According to the study from the Fragile Families and Child Wellbeing Study, children with incarcerated fathers were more likely to develop cognitive issues and display aggressive behavior by starting at the age of 5. These developmental issues most likely do not occur until age 5 because that is when a child is able to remember more. Mothers of the children experience high levels of depression. Even though mothers of incarcerated children experience depression, they are more likely to report that they are fine. I'm sure that this has something to do with wanting to stay strong for their children since their father is not physically there. The mother has to be physically and mentally in the moment for their child. Mental health issues affect the bonding between incarcerated fathers and children because of the develop of anger, cognitive issues, and with aggressive behavior, sometimes a child doesn't know how to explain what is going on with them or how they feel that they have been affected by their father being absent. With mothers experiencing high levels of depression, it may be a challenge pushing the child towards getting to know their incarcerated parent a little bit better. Just because the mother is in a rut of her own and she doesn't really know how to express what she's going through. So if she can't express what she's going through or she isn't getting the proper help that she needs, then that could affect her child. Now, if it's for incarcerated fathers that have developed cognitive issues and mental health issues, then that also causes a burden in being able to bond with their child. When fathers are in prison, they are not taught how to communicate with others properly once they leave outside of the prison system. If such behavior started by the age of 5, according to Walker, then imagine if the father is in jail from the time a child is 2 years old up until they're 16, then that child won't really know how to communicate or express how they're feeling to their father because they've been displaying this aggressive behavior, these cognitive issues for so long that it's hard to just jump back into a child's life and say, oh, hey, stop, dad's back, and you don't have to act like that anymore. Also, there's not much study that even goes into the prison system and at least just asks prisoners, are they okay? Or incarcerated fathers, are they okay? And do they miss their children? And what things that they think could be done differently to help them be able to bond more with their children? Research shows that children whose fathers have been incarcerated receive less in financial support than their counterparts whose fathers have no history of incarceration. This shows that conforming to society is extremely hard because incarcerated fathers have a hard time with finding jobs and with keeping jobs. In the YouTube video by Skin Deep, Mia and Khalil are a good example of how hard it is to bond with their children and families out of prison and the emotional effect that it brings. From the looks of the YouTube video by Skin Deep, it seems as though that was Mia and Khalil's first time doing an actual sit down and actually talking about how each other felt when they weren't in each other's lives while Khalil was in prison. Conversations like these should be done sooner in order to avoid bottling up feelings. The bond between Mia and Khalil could have been broken, but it seems as though ever since he was released from incarceration, that their relationship is so much better. They look up to one another. You can tell by the way they look at each other that they love one another. And the emotion is what brings them closer together. Also, I would like to add that, of course, children whose father have not been incarcerated receive more financial support than their counterparts. Just because each father does not have the same resources. So Geller, Garfinkel, and Western really shouldn't have compared the two because there is two different ways of resources to even get financial support. Now there are more big corporations that are hiring felons, but people do have to look hard for them. They're not out in the open and they don't just hire any felon. For an incarcerated father not to be able to conform to society, that can mess with their ego. or self-esteem. Sometimes when people's ego and self-esteem are damaged, they tend to shut down for people out of fear of rejection. The media's reaction to incarcerated fathers and their relationship with their children took some interesting points. According to an article written by Martin in 2017, he stated, quote, children of incarcerated parents are on average six times more likely to become incarcerated themselves, unquote. This goes into the point of having lack of resources. The children of incarcerated parents are likely to grow up with lack of resources and poverty, and that will lead them to a life where they have to commit such heinous crimes. And without the proper psychological help, their children's mental health can also encourage them to be incarcerated in their futures. In the article written by Alexander, Cooper, and Murphy in 2015, they stated, quote, although in prison programs focusing on parenting skills are common, few are focused on meeting the needs of children directly during the time parents are in prison. This article identified the problem with incarcerated fathers and children, and they are trying to create solutions on how to solve them. The last point, quote, children need their parents, unquote, by Lee Morris in 2020, also showed that society and the media can identify the problem. It's just about whether there will be something done about it. The start of something being done can be with prison reforms, more visitation rights, more in-person visitation. We have more conjugal visits than in-person visits with children and families. The media's reaction does not really focus on the bonding aspect of incarcerated fathers and their children, but they do focus on the fact that children need their parents, as Lee and Morris said. A lot of people may view incarcerated fathers on, oh, whatever they did, they belong to being there, but not really thinking of the effect that it may have on their children. People don't think about things unless it hits home. The media could focus more on bonding and incarcerated fathers bonding with their children, and maybe society will come together and do something to make a change about that. Because if we see more videos on the internet or more news articles about prison reforms and how they let children come and visit their fathers in prison and have dances for a day, then that would just attract so much attention and make society want to do more, and the government want to have more programs like this, because it may help fathers once they get out of prison. Both academic journals and the media agree that incarcerated fathers have a lasting effect on children's mental health and futures. The media takes a better approach to making a change in prison systems so that children are less likely affected. The image on this slide shows that 2.7 million children in the U.S. have at least one parent in prison. That is 2.7 million children whose lives are affected daily by losing a parent to the system. If there is a way to decrease those numbers by, for example, allowing prisoners to get out that have nonviolent crimes, that will help. But in order to make a change, society has to come together and make more prison reform and more programs that target family and rehabilitation into society so that prisoners don't have to go back, affecting their child's lives even more. Of course, it takes more funding from the government to make a change in the prison systems, but it will also save money in the long run if we put more money into the prison systems now that will target being able to interact with not just families, but the society and the outside world after prison. Then prisons become less crowded. More children will have their parents back, and there will be more funding for the government.